August 17th, 1944. Normandy 0600 hours. The forest was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes you hold your breath. Then came the sound, not from the ground, but from above. A low mechanical growl that grew into a roar, rattling the leaves, shaking the earth itself. German tank commander Hetman Klaus Becker snapped his head skyward, his hand frozen on the hatch of his Panther. "Jabos!" someone screamed. The sky split open. 8 P-47 Thunderbolts tore through the morning mist like metal birds of prey, their engines howling, their wings glinting in the early sun. In seconds the world became fire. Rockets streamed from under their wings, 5 and high-velocity projectiles that screamed as they fell. The first one hit 20 m ahead, throwing dirt and shrapnel into the air. The second struck a Panther directly on its engine deck. The explosion was immediate, violent, final. Becker dove into his tank, shouting orders no one could hear over the thunder. But before his crew could reverse, before they could even rotate the turret, he heard it. Another sound, deeper, grinding, the unmistakable clank of tracks on stone. From the smoke and dust, they emerged. Sherman tanks, dozens of them moving fast, turrets already turning, guns elevated. They didn't charge head-on like suicide cavalry. They flanked, they spread, they moved like wolves, coordinating a kill, exploiting the chaos the Thunderbolts had unleashed from above. One Panther tried to pivot. A 75 mm shell punched through its thinner sidearm before it could fire. Another attempted retreat. A second P-47 swept low, strafing its rear deck with 8 150 caliber machine guns, shredding the engine and fuel lines. Within minutes, half the German column was burning. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. This was coordination, deliberate, deadly, and devastatingly effective. For months, the myth had held. German Panthers were invincible. Thicker armor, longer guns, superior engineering. On paper, they dominated the battlefield. But war isn't fought on paper. And by the summer of 1944, the Allies had discovered something the Germans never anticipated. A secret alliance, not between nations, but between steel and sky. If you're fascinated by the hidden tactics that turned the tide of World War II, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next untold story. By late 1943, American tank crews in Europe faced a terrifying reality. They were outgunned. The German Panther aved rolled off production lines that autumn, and it changed everything. With frontal armor up to 80 mm thick, sloped at aggressive angles, and armed with a devastating 75 mm KK-42L-70 gun, it could destroy a Sherman from over 2.0 m away. Often before American crews even saw it. The Sherman's 75 mm M3 gun, by contrast, struggled to penetrate a Panther's front armor, even at point-blank range. The math was brutal. Intelligence reports from Normandy painted a grim picture. In direct engagements, it took an average of 5 Shermans to destroy 1 Panther, 5 tanks, 5 crews, and even then, success wasn't guaranteed. Tankers gave the Sherman a nickname that stuck. The Ronson, as in the Ronson lighter, lights first time every time. Dark humor born from dark experience. A single Panther could hold a crossroads, pin down an entire company, and vanish before reinforcements arrived. German crews knew it. They grew confident, even arrogant, relying on their technical superiority. But American commanders refused to accept the equation. General Omar Bradley, overseeing ground operations in France, understood that he couldn't out-engineer the Germans, not quickly enough. American industry could produce Shermans faster than Germany could build Panthers. Yes, but numbers alone weren't enough. Throwing more tanks at the problem meant throwing more men into the fire. The solution had to be tactical, adaptive, unconventional. And it was already forming, not in a conference room, but on the battlefield itself, where necessity breeds innovation faster than any war college. The U.S. Army Air Forces had a weapon of their own, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. Nicknamed the Jug for its bulky barrel-shaped fuselage, the P-47 was originally designed as a high-altitude fighter. But by mid-1944, It had evolved into something else entirely, a ground attack beast, armed with 8 50-50 caliber machine guns capable of carrying up to 2,500 lb of bombs or 10 5 high-velocity aircraft rockets. The Thunderbolt was devastating against ground targets. Separately, Shermans and Thunderbolts were formidable. Together, they became something the Germans never planned for. The question was, could they be synchronized? Coordination sounds simple. It isn't. In early 1944, air support meant chaos. A ground commander would call in an air-burst strike, relay coordinates through multiple layers of command, and wait. Sometimes the planes arrived an hour later. Sometimes they bombed the wrong grid square. Sometimes they didn't come at all. The gap between request and response could mean the difference between victory and annihilation. But the Allies were learning. Enter the VHF radio revolution. By spring 1944, forward air controllers, FACs, were being embedded directly with frontline tank units. These men, often pilots themselves or specially trained observers, carried portable ANVAR-C 3 radios tuned to frequencies shared with fighter squadrons overhead. For the first time, ground forces could speak directly to pilots in real time. The system was called cab rank. Fighter squadrons would orbit designated zones at high altitude, waiting like taxis at a stand. When a tank unit spotted enemy armor, the FAC would radio coordinates, target descriptions, and emergency codes. Within minutes, sometimes seconds, P-47s would peel off and dive. But true coordination required more than radios. It required trust. Tank commanders had to suppress their instinct to fire first. If they opened up too early, the Germans would scatter or take cover, wasting the airstrike. Pilots had to trust that the coordinates were accurate and that friendly forces wouldn't be in the blast zone. Both sides had to synchronize timing. Too early and the Shermans were exposed. Too late and the enemy escaped. The learning curve was steep. There were mistakes. Blue incidents where bombs fell on American positions. Miscommunications that left tanks unsupported as German guns found their range. But with each operation, the system refined. Codes became standardized. Timing became instinctive. By June 1944, as Allied forces pushed inland from the Normandy beaches, a new doctrine was emerging: combined arms lethality. Tanks wouldn't hunt Panthers alone. They'd call in the sky. The P-47 would strike first. Rockets and bombs to disorient, suppress, and damage. Then, while smoke and confusion reigned, the Shermans would move in for the kill, targeting weak points, side armor, engine decks, tracks. Speed, precision, overwhelming force concentrated in seconds. The Germans called it Jabos Schreck, the terror of the fighter bombers. They had no answer for it. What began as improvisation was becoming doctrine, a deadly alliance written in fire and steel. The P-47 Thunderbolt was never supposed to be beautiful. It was blunt, heavy, and built like a flying tank. But that's exactly what made it perfect. Weighing 7 tons fully loaded, the P-47 was the heaviest single-engine fighter of the war. Powered by a massive Pratt & Whitney R-2008 100 double Wasp radial engine producing 2,000 horsepower, it could absorb punishment that would obliterate lighter aircraft. Pilots called it indestructible. Stories circulated of Thunderbolts returning to base with half a wing shot off, engines riddled with holes, cockpits shattered, still flying. But it was the armament that made German tank crews fear the sky. 8 M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, 4 per wing, firing at a combined rate of 800 rounds per minute. In a single two-conned burst, a P-47 could send over 20 pounds of lead downrange. Against infantry or soft vehicles, it was slaughter. Against tanks, the effect was psychological and tactical. Machine gun fire couldn't penetrate a Panther's armor, but it could shred vision slits, antenna, external equipment, and anyone outside the hall. Then came the rockets, the 5 high-velocity aircraft rocket H, VAR became the Thunderbolt's signature weapon in ground attack. Each rocket weighed 140 pounds and carried a 45 lb warhead. A P-47 could carry 10 of them, 5 under each wing. When fired in salvo, they streaked toward the target at nearly 200 feet per second, hitting with enough kinetic energy to crack open even the thickest armor, especially engine decks and turret roofs, the Panthers' weakest points. Pilots trained relentlessly, dive angles, lead calculations, target recognition from altitude. They learned to distinguish a Panther from a Tiger, a Panzer IV from a captured Sherman, all while screaming toward the ground at 400 mph with flak bursting around them. Accuracy was everything. A miss meant wasted ordnance. A hit meant a burning tank and a crew that never got out. By July 1944, P-47 squadrons assigned to ground support missions like the famed 365th Fighter Group, the Hellhawks, were perfecting the attack run. They'd approach from the sun when possible, masking their dive. They'd stray first to suppress anti-aircraft fire, then release rockets at 1,500 FD, pulling up hard to avoid their own blast, and the results spoke for themselves. How many Panthers could a single P-47 destroy? The answer was about to be written across the French countryside. History remembers the Sherman as the underdog. Outgunned, out-armored, overmatched. But history forgets the Sherman's greatest strength. It was everywhere. Between 1942 and 1945, American factories produced nearly 50 Sherman tanks, 50 Germany built roughly 6 Panthers in the same period. The Sherman wasn't designed to win duels. It was designed to win wars through mobility, reliability, and sheer overwhelming presence. And it was adaptable. By mid-1944, American tank crews have learned to exploit what the Sherman could do better than any German tank. Move fast, maneuver aggressively, and operate as a coordinated pack. Panthers were solitary predators. Shermans were wolves. They didn't fight fair. They didn't need to. When a Panther was spotted, Sherman platoon wouldn't charge head on into its 75 cannon. They'd spread. One tank would draw fire, exposing itself just enough to force the Panther to rotate its turret. While the German crew focused on that single target, 2 or 3 other Shermans would swing wide, using terrain, buildings, or smoke for cover and strike from the flanks or rear. A Panther's side armor was only 40 to 50 mm thick. At close range, even the Sherman's standard 75 mm gun could penetrate. But the real evolution came when Sherman stopped hunting alone and started hunting with the sky. Tank commanders began carrying colored smoke grenades and signal panels. When they spotted German armor, they'd mark the position with smoke, usually bright orange or yellow, then pull back and wait. Overhead, P-47 pilots would see the smoke and no targets below. Friendly marked, clear to engage. The timing had to be perfect. Pop smoke, call in coordinates, wait for the roar. Then, as rockets and bombs shattered the enemy formation, advance through the chaos. The Germans, stunned and disoriented, would be caught between fire from above and fire from the ground. No time to regroup, no space to maneuver. This was combined arms warfare at its most lethal. And it required something the Germans, for all their technical brilliance, struggled with: flexibility. German doctrine was rigid, hierarchical, methodical. American doctrine, forged in the crucible of Normandy, was improvisational, decentralized, adaptive. Give initiative to the men on the ground, trust the pilots overhead, communicate, coordinate, kill. By August 1944, the alliance between Sherman and Thunderbolt wasn't a theory. It was a weapon, and it was about to be unleashed. Late July 1944, Operation Cobra, the breakout. For 7 weeks, Allied forces had been locked in the Normandy hedge. Brutal, grinding combat, where every field was a fortress and every lane a killing zone. German armor, particularly Panther and Tiger units, held defensive positions that turned the Bauge into a graveyard for Sherman crews. But General Omar Bradley had a plan. A hammer blow, concentrated, overwhelming aerial bombardment, followed by armored breakout. And at the center of it all, close air support on a scale never attempted before. On July 25th, over 1,500 heavy bombers and 380 medium bombers carpet bombed a 5-kilometer section of German lines near St. Lo, the earth shook. Entire units ceased to exist, but the Germans dug in and determined didn't collapse. Panther units scattered but intact, prepared to counterattack. That's when the Thunderbolts arrived. For 3 days, P-47 squadrons flew armed reconnaissance missions, hunting German armor, attempting to reposition. They flew low below 10 FD, weaving through smoke and dust, searching for the telltale shapes of tanks. When they found them, they struck without hesitation. One pilot, Captain Arlo Henry of the 406th Fighter Group, later described it. You'd see them moving in column trying to relocate under tree cover. We'd come in fast, line up on the lead vehicle, and ripple fire all 10 rockets. The first hit would stop the column, the rest would panic. Then the Shermans would come through the gaps. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Sherman battalions equipped with newly mounted 50-caliber machine guns on turret tops for anti-aircraft defense advanced in waves. They moved fast, bypassing strong points, exploiting gaps created by air strikes. When they encountered resistance, they didn't stop to fight. They called in the jugs. Forward air controllers embedded with lead tank units became the most valuable men on the battlefield. A single radio call could bring 4 P-47s down in under 3 minutes. The psychological impact was devastating. German tank crews, already battered by bombing, now faced an enemy that could see them from above and strike before they could return fire. By July 30th, U.S. armored divisions had broken through. The Germans were retreating, not orderly withdrawal, but in confusion. And when an army retreats in confusion, it becomes vulnerable. The greatest test of the Sherman Thunderbolt alliance was about to begin. The Violet's Pocket, August 1944. Normandy was collapsing. Not slowly, not methodically, but all at once. The German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army, battered by weeks of attrition and hammered by Operation Cobra, were pulling back fast, desperate, trying to escape encirclement. But the Allies had other plans. From the north, Canadian and British forces pushed south. From the south and west, American armored spearheads raced east. The goal was simple: close the gap. Trap the retreating Germans in a pocket near the town of Falaise, cut off their escape routes and destroy them. It was a race. If the Germans moved fast enough, they could slip through the narrowing corridor between Files and Argentine, a gap barely 20 km wide, and regroup behind the same river. If the Allies closed at first, they'd annihilate an entire German army group. Thousands of German vehicles poured into the shrinking pocket. Tanks, half-trucks, trucks, artillery pieces, staff columns, supply columns, and among them some of Germany's most elite armored units. The remnants of Panzer Lehr, 2nd SS Panzer Division, and the 116th Panzer Division. Equipped with Panthers and Tigers, they moved at night when they could, using darkness to shield them from the dreaded Yabos, but night only bought hours. Come dawn, the sky belonged to the Allies. On August 13th, as the gap narrowed to 15 km, the slaughter began. P-47 squadrons operating in rotating shifts turned the roads into ribbons of fire. Pilots flew so many sorties that ground crews worked around the clock to rearm and refuel. Some planes flew 4, 5, even 6 missions in a single day. Pilots described it as a target-rich environment, a euphemism for a shooting gallery, but it wasn't just about destruction. It was about disruption. Every burning vehicle became an obstacle. Every crater forced detours. Every attack slowed the retreat, buying time for Allied ground forces to tighten the noose. And when German armor tried to fight back, when Panther units turned to defend the columns, they exposed themselves. That's when the Shermans arrived. Rolling through shattered towns and cratered fields, American and Canadian tank battalions pressed forward, engaging German rear guards in running battles. The coordination was relentless. Spot, mark, strike, advance. The pocket was closing, and inside it 100,000 German soldiers and thousands of vehicles faced annihilation. What happened next would redefine armored warfare. August 17, 1944, 0530 hours, the killing ground. The roads between Fales and Argentinian had become a graveyard without graves. Burned-out trucks lined every route, overturned wagons, dead horses still in harness, and everywhere abandoned equipment, helmets, rifles, personal belongings scattered in haste. But the German columns kept moving. Desperation has its own momentum. By dawn, the sky was clear. A pilot's dream, a tanker's nightmare. The first wave of P-47s lifted off from forward airstrips at 600 hours. They didn't need complex briefings. The target was everything inside the pocket. Flight Lieutenant Robert Johnson, 61st Fighter Squadron, would later write in his mission report, "We didn't have to search. You could see the roads from 15 mi out. Solid lines of vehicles nose-to-tail trying to squeeze through the gap. I've never seen anything like it. Targets everywhere." Attack runs were methodical, textbook, terrifying. Thunderbolts would dive from 8,000 FT building speed, then level off at 500 FT to fire rockets, 10 VARs per plane, 40 P-47s in the first wave, 400 rockets streaking toward Earth in less than 2 minutes. Each impact created a crater, a fireball, a choke point. Then came the strafing runs, 850 caliber machine guns per aircraft, raking the roads with thousands of rounds. Fuel trucks exploded. Ammunition carriers detonated in chain reactions. Soldiers dove into ditches, fields, anywhere away from the road. The Germans tried to fight back. Flak guns, hastily positioned, fired bursts of 20 mm and 37 mm shells. Some Thunderbolts took hits. A few went down, trailing smoke, pilots bailing out or trying to limp back to Allied lines. But for every P-47 lost, 50 vehicles burned. And when the first wave pulled off, the second wave arrived, the third, then the fourth. The attacks continued all day, relentless, unforgiving. By afternoon, the roads weren't just blocked. They were impassable, vehicles abandoned, survivors fleeing on foot, entire units dissolved. But the real brilliance of the operation wasn't just air power. It was what came next. While German forces reeled from the bombing, scattered and disorganized Sherman tanks of the U.S. 90th Infantry Division and Canadian 4th Armored Division moved in from the flanks, not to occupy, but to finish. The hammer had fallen. Now came the anvil. The ground assault came through. Smoke so thick you couldn't see 30 m. Sherman columns advanced in wedge formations, textbook combined arms. Infantry followed in half-tracks, ready to dismount. Engineers cleared obstacles. And overhead, circling like predators, the P-47s waited for targets of opportunity. German defenders, what remained of them, tried to establish lines. Panther tanks, survivors of the aerial onslaught, took up hull-down positions behind rubble and embankments. Their 75 mm guns were still deadly. Their crews, though shaken, were still disciplined. But they were isolated, scattered, and coordination was impossible. A Panther in a good position could still knock out 3, 4, even 5 Shermans before being destroyed. But there were no good positions left. The roads were blocked. The fields were cratered. Visibility was near zero. Radio communications were fragmentary. Officers shouted orders that never reached their units. The Shermans didn't fight them head on. They didn't have to. Tank commanders used the chaos as camouflage. They'd advance under the cover of smoke from burning vehicles, using wrecks as concealment. When a Panther revealed itself by firing, the Sherman wouldn't return fire immediately. Instead, the tank commander would mark the position with colored smoke, call in coordinates, and pull back. 60 seconds later, a flight of Thunderbolts would appear, guided by the smoke. Rockets or bombs would bracket the position. Even if the Panthers survived the blast, the crew would be stunned, the optics damaged, the tank exposed. Then the Shermans would close in from multiple directions, firing on the move, targeting tracks to immobilize, then sidearm to kill. It was brutal, efficient, overwhelming. One German tank commander, Oberleutnant Ralph Herfig, captured later that weak described the experience. You couldn't fight back. You'd engage one Sherman and 3 more would appear from nowhere. You'd try to retreat, and the rockets would come from the sky. There was no front line, no rear, just fire everywhere all the time. By August 19th, The file's pocket was nearly closed. The gap had shrunk to less than 5 km. Inside, trapped German forces were disintegrating, vehicles abandoned by the thousand, soldiers surrendering in groups, some waving white flags, others simply walking toward Allied lines with their hands raised. But there was still one more act to play out, one final apocalyptic engagement. The Germans called it Die Corridor d'Histoire, the Corridor of Death. August 20th, 1944. The final miles. The corridor was less than 2 km wide. Now on both sides, Allied artillery pounded German positions. Machine gun nests lined the edges. Tank destroyers waited in ambush, and above, Thunderbolts circled in endless rotation, waiting for anything that moved. It was a gauntlet, the only escape route left, and thousands of German soldiers tried to run it. They moved at night in small groups, abandoning tanks and vehicles, carrying only rifles and whatever supplies they could grab. Some made it through, disappearing into forests, linking up with retreating units east of the Seine, but most didn't. Come dawn, the aircraft returned. This time, it wasn't just P-47s. Hawker Typhoons from the British RAF joined the assault, armed with RP-3 rockets, 60 lb warheads that struck like hammers from heaven. Spitfires flew escort and strafed ground targets. The entire Allied Tactical Air Force turned the pocket into a crucible. And on the ground, Sherman battalions pressed inward from both sides, converging on the trapped German forces. There was no battle plan anymore, no intricate maneuver, just compression, relentless, suffocating pressure. German Panther units, those still operational, made last stands. Some tried to hold crossroads to allow infantry to escape. Others formed rear guards, sacrificing themselves to buy minutes. A few attempted breakouts, desperate charges toward Allied lines, hoping to punch through. None succeeded. One engagement near the village of Saint-Lambert-Serdiv became legendary. A single Panther hidden in a stone barn destroyed 4 Canadian Shermans in under 3 minutes. The 5th Sherman called in air support. A P-47 responded within 90 seconds, putting 2 rockets through the barn's roof. The Panther's ammunition exploded, the barn collapsed, the gun went silent. By the afternoon of August 21st, organized resistance inside the pocket had ceased. Allied forces from the north and south met near Chamba, officially closing the gap. The pocket was sealed. Behind them, scattered across 50-square kilm, lay the wreckage of an army. Over 10,000 German soldiers were dead. Another 50,000 captured. Hundreds of tanks destroyed or abandoned. The roads looked like junkyards. Metal carcasses piled on top of each other, wheels skyward, turrets blown off, barrels bent. Allied intelligence officers walked through the devastation in silence. One Canadian officer was heard saying, "I didn't know that many vehicles existed." But the true impact was strategic. What happened in the Fal's pocket changed the war. In the aftermath, the numbers told a story that stunned even Allied commanders. Over 400 tanks and self-propelled guns destroyed or captured in the Falaise pocket alone. Among them, more than 150 Panthers, Germany's most advanced armored fighting vehicle. The tank that was supposed to dominate Europe for years gone, not defeated in glorious tank duels, but hunted, hammered, and burned by an alliance of air and ground forces working in perfect synchrony. The Germans had lost more than machines. They'd lost entire divisions, experienced crews, officers who'd fought since Poland and France. Irreplaceable, but beyond the statistics, something else had shifted, something psychological. For 3 years, German armored doctrine had relied on technical superiority. Better guns, thicker armor, superior optics, in one engagements, German tanks won. The numbers supported it. The math confirmed it. And so, German tacticians built their strategies around it. Elite units equipped with elite machines operating with elite confidence. Violets shattered that illusion. It proved that technical superiority meant nothing if you couldn't coordinate, communicate, or adapt. It showed that the greatest tank in the world was still vulnerable when attacked from multiple dimensions from the sky and the ground simultaneously with no time to react, no space to maneuver. The Americans and British hadn't out-engineered the Germans. They'd outthought them. The secret alliance between Shermans and Thunderbolts wasn't born in a laboratory or a design bureau. It was forged on the battlefield by men who refused to accept the limitations of their equipment and instead rewrote the rules of engagement. Forward air controllers became force multipliers, radios became weapons, coordination became the ultimate battlefield advantage. The rigid hierarchy of German command couldn't adapt fast enough. By the time Panther crews realized what was happening, that they weren't just fighting tanks, but entire integrated systems of tanks, aircraft, infantry, and artillery, it was too late. German Field Marshal Gunther von Klug, commanding Army Group B during the Files disaster, sent a final message to Berlin before being relieved of command. The enemy's air superiority is crushing. Our armored units cannot maneuver, cannot concentrate, cannot counterattack. This is not war as we know it. He was right, it wasn't. It was the future, and the Germans had no answer for it. Within weeks, Paris would fall, then Belgium, then the Rhine. The myth of the invincible Panther died in the fields of Normandy, and with it, Germany's hopes for victory in the West. But victory came with a price. Always does, the pilots of the P-47 squadrons flew until they couldn't see straight. Sorties blurred together, 6 missions a day, 7. Some pilots logged over 300 combat hours in August alone, the equivalent of a full combat tour compressed into 4 weeks. Fatigue set in. Mistakes happened. Friendly fire incidents, though rare, were devastating. On August 14th, a flight of Thunderbolts mistakenly strafed a column of Canadian tanks near Files, killing 12 men. The pilots, exhausted and operating in the chaotic fog of war, had misidentified the vehicles. The incident was investigated. Lessons were documented, but the grief remained. Ground crews worked around the clock. 16-hour shifts became normal. Rearming a single P-47 with rockets, belted ammunition, and fuel took 20 minutes under ideal conditions. Multiply that by hundreds of planes, thousands of sorties, and you begin to understand the Herculean effort behind the scenes, and the Thunderbolts themselves paid a toll. Flak was constant. German anti-aircraft crews, desperate and determined, filled the sky with steel. Some days a squadron would launch 12 aircraft and return with 8. Pilots bailed out over enemy territory. Some were captured, some evaded. Some never made it out of the cockpit. For the Sherman crews, the experience was equally brutal. Even with air support, tank combat remained intimate and lethal. A penetrating hit meant fire, smoke, and seconds to escape if you were lucky. Crews developed superstitions, lucky charms, routines, anything to maintain the illusion of control in a world where death could arrive through 6 in of steel without warning. Tanker casualties in Normandy were staggering. Some units lost 50% of their crews in a single week. Replacements arrived green, untrained in the realities of combat. Veterans tried to teach them what they could. Stay low, move fast, never stop in the open, trust the jugs overhead. But the learning curve was written in blood. One Sherman commander, interviewed years later, was asked what he remembered most about the Falaise operation. He paused for a long time before answering. The smell, burning fuel, burning metal, burning flesh. You could smell it for miles, and the sound, the screaming engines, the explosions, the radios crackling with voices you'd never hear again. That's what I remember. Not the victory, the cost. War is never clean, and innovation, no matter how effective, is never free. But it worked. By September 1944, the alliance between Shermans and Thunderbolts wasn't secret anymore. It was doctrine. Training programs were revised. Forward air controller schools were established. Radio procedures were standardized. What had begun as battlefield improvisation became official Allied strategy. Every armored division was assigned dedicated fighter-bomber squadrons. Every tank battalion trained with embedded facts. Communication protocols that once took minutes were reduced to seconds. The Germans noticed. Intelligence reports intercepted by Allied codebreakers revealed the impact. One Wehrmacht assessment dated September 3rd grimly concluded. American armored operations have achieved a level of air-ground integration that renders our defensive tactics obsolete. Panzer units can no longer maneuver in daylight without facing immediate aerial response. Concentrated formations are suicide. Dispersed formations lack combat effectiveness. There is no tactical solution. That admission was damning. The vaunted German war machine, built on precision, discipline, and superior technology, had been undone by something simpler, teamwork. The lesson reverberated beyond Europe. In the Pacific, U.S. Marine Corps units began experimenting with similar tactics, coordinating with Navy Corsairs and Hellcats for close air support against Japanese positions. The doctrine spread, adapted, evolved. But the core principle remained. No single weapon system, no matter how advanced, could dominate a modern battlefield alone. Victory belonged to those who could integrate multiple capabilities into a unified, responsive, adaptive whole. The Panther was still a formidable machine. Its gun could still kill from 2 km. Its armor could still shrug off frontal hits. But by autumn 1944, Panther crews operated under constant fear of the sky. They avoided open roads. They moved only at night. They abandoned aggressive tactics in favor of desperate defense. The psychological shift was profound. German morale, already eroding, elapsed further. When your best weapon can't protect you, when your technical superiority means nothing against an enemy that coordinates faster, hits harder, and adapts quicker, hope dies. American commanders, meanwhile, grew more confident. General George Patton, commanding the Third Army, famously quipped, "Give me enough Shermans and enough jugs overhead, and I'll drive to Berlin by Christmas." He was exaggerating, of course. The war would drag on for 8 more months, but the strategic momentum had irreversibly shifted. The secret alliance had become a sledgehammer, and Germany, its armies shattered, its industries bombed, its territories shrinking, had no answer. The writing was on the wall, scrolled in rocket trails and tank tracks. The Falaise pocket closed on August 21, 1944. The war didn't end, but something fundamental had broken. Germany's ability to conduct mobile armored warfare in the West was shattered. The 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army had been destroyed. Elite divisions reduced to skeletal remnants. The equipment losses were catastrophic. Not just tanks, but trucks, artillery, radios, everything needed for sustained operations. Field Marshal Model, who replaced von Lodge after the latter's suicide, attempted to reconstitute German defenses along the Seine, then the German border itself, but every position collapsed faster than the last. Allied armor, supported relentlessly from the air, moved faster than German reinforcements could arrive. Paris fell on August 25th, Brussels on September 3rd. By mid-September, Allied forces were approaching the German frontier, a distance of 400 m covered in less than a month. The human cost was staggering on all sides. Allied casualties in Normandy totaled over 200,000 killed, wounded, or missing. German casualties exceeded 400,000, including 200,000 captured. Civilian losses in France during the liberation exceeded 20,000. Towns reduced to rubble, farms destroyed, families shattered. And the machines, thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of vehicles, hundreds of aircraft, graveyards of steel stretched across France, grim monuments to industrial-age warfare. But the strategic impact was decisive. Germany had lost its ability to defend occupied Europe. The Allies had proven that combined arms doctrine, executed with precision and supported by overwhelming air superiority, could defeat even the most technically advanced enemy. Post-war analysis confirmed what battlefield reports had suggested. In tank versus tank engagements, Panthers still enjoyed favorable kill ratios against Shermans, often 3-1 or better. But when air support was factored in, the equation reversed. A Sherman battalion supported by P-47s could destroy Panther units with minimal losses. Technology hadn't won the war. Coordination had. The Soviet Union took note. In post-war debriefs and captured German documents, Soviet military theorists studied the files operation extensively. The lessons influenced Soviet armored doctrine for decades, emphasis on combined arms, integration of air and ground forces, and the importance of rapid coordinated maneuver. The Second World War was the last war where individual heroism and machine superiority could dictate outcomes. The wars that followed would belong to systems, networks, and coordination. Violets was the turning point, the moment when the future of warfare became visible. Today, militaries worldwide study the Falaise pocket not as a battle, but as a template. The principle, established in August 1944, that integrated multi-domain operations defeat isolated superior forces, has become the foundation of modern military doctrine. From the Gulf War to Afghanistan, from Iraq to Ukraine, the lesson remains: connectivity wins wars. The Sherman tank, so often remembered as inadequate, earned its place in history not through individual superiority, but through adaptability. It could be produced quickly, repaired easily, and upgraded continuously. It worked, and when paired with the right support, it became lethal. The P-47 Thunderbolt, designed as a high-altitude interceptor, found its true calling as a ground attack aircraft. Over 15,000 were built. They served in every theater, destroyed thousands of enemy vehicles, and saved countless Allied lives. Pilots who flew the Jug spoke of it with reverence. Indestructible, relentless, dependable. But the real legacy isn't the machines, it's the idea. That war is not won by the best weapon, but by the best system. That communication is as important as ammunition. That soldiers on the ground and pilots in the sky working together can achieve what neither could accomplish alone. The Germans learned this too late. Their Panthers were masterpieces of engineering, but they fought alone, unsupported, in a war that had evolved beyond single-platform dominance. The secret alliance between Shermans and Thunderbolts was never really secret. It was simply invisible to an enemy that couldn't adapt fast enough to counter it. By the time German commanders understood what they were facing, the war in the West was lost. In the forests of Normandy, on the roads between Files and Argentan, you can still find remnants, rusted tank hulls, fragments of aircraft, memorials to men who fought and died in a brutal summer 70 years gone. But the echoes remain in every forward air controller's radio call, in every coordinated strike, in every doctrine that emphasizes integration over isolation, the alliance between earth and sky. If you enjoyed uncovering this untold chapter of World War II history, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with anyone fascinated by the hidden strategies that changed the course of history. There are more stories to tell, and we're just getting started. It was here in the chaos of Normandy that the myth of invincibility finally died.